Cybersecurity at U.S. ports has been in the spotlight this week. The Biden administration announcing it will invest $20 billion to upgrade equipment, warning current Chinese-made cranes could be a threat to national security. The Port of Los Angeles has been investing in ways to prevent cyber attacks since 2019, and the executive director, Gina Seroka, joins us now. Gene, thank you for being here.
Good to see you, Josh.
So Gene, let's get right into this news. So the Biden administration, it's going to invest billions here, right? Replace these Chinese-made cranes at our ports. What is this, Gene, going to mean for the Port of Los Angeles?
Well, it goes a little deeper than that as well. Looking at what the Port of Los Angeles has done in partnership with the Department of Homeland Security, about 10 years ago, we put in the nation's first Cybersecurity Operations Center. Just last year, it stopped 750 million cyber intrusion attempts, and that wasn't enough for us. With IBM, we co-created one of the world's first cyber resilience centers that brought in our private sector partners. And to date, little over 15 months in, we've stopped 6 intrusion attempts to private sector interests of which they were unaware. Now the focus begins on trying to get some of this equipment manufactured in the United States so we can take a little more control over national security as it relates to the supply chain.
Okay, so I want to linger on this a little bit because those are big numbers and surprising numbers that we're seeing all of these attempted incursions. Are they coming from the hardware? Are they coming in some cases from cranes that are made elsewhere, or what do we know about where they originate?
I won't speak for the national security experts, but safe to say about 50% of the cranes at the Port of Los Angeles are manufactured in China. They're taking up data, analyzing it, and using it for what we just don't know at this point in time. But the federal government, under President Biden's direction, doesn't want to take chances in this area.
But that seems sort of speculative, doesn't it? I mean, you know, you're running this port. You talked about all those incursions. Like, if you don't know where they're coming from and who's doing them, it's hard to stop them instead of just sort of guessing at where they might be coming from. No?
Not necessarily true.
Okay.
If we go downstairs on the second floor into that cybersecurity center, we can see the IP addresses, the nation states involved, and the flow of those intrusion attempts, no matter whether they're coming to Los Angeles or points beyond. So we've got a pretty good idea with respect to our information, where that is happening, and the federal government has a deeper look as well.
Gene, I'm curious though, because China has posed a national security risk for some time. China is an adversary. So I'm curious, why in the first place were there Chinese-made cranes at our ports? Was it cost? Was it there wasn't domestic manufacturers?
Well, Josh, like much everything else, we've shipped manufacturing overseas the past 45 to 50 years. Cranes, chassis wheels that move our containers around, as well as those container boxes. We don't make that or any of those products in the United States. And part of the efforts of people like Secretary Gina Raimondo at Commerce and others is to try to reshore, nearshore some of this manufacturing work so we can tighten up the supply chains and help American companies grow.
I mean, this is a huge endeavor, just like the reshoring the chip industry, for example. Going to take time, going to take money, going to take labor. I mean, when are we going to start to see U.S.-made equipment in U.S. ports?
Yeah, you're right, Julie. It's not going to be a flip of a switch. But I think we've got subsidiaries, and a couple of companies were named in the press release from Washington the other night, and we'll see more and more start getting interested. Just like the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, the idea here is the federal government is putting in multi-billion dollars worth of investment, giving confidence to the private sector to come and invest behind that.
And Gina, I want to switch gears here a little bit. I'm just interested to get your take. What do cargo volumes look right now at the Port of LA, Gina? Are they strong? Are they soft? What do you see now and looking ahead?
I'm encouraged, Josh. 6 straight months of year-on-year growth. We've got a dock workers contract now that gives us a line of sight of confidence for the next 5 years. January was our second best on record. And my prognosis for the first quarter is about 20% growth thus far.
Of course, we're watching what's going on around the globe in terms of shipping, in particular in the Mideast with some of the attacks that are going on there. But the way that the flow of shipping works around the globe, does that affect what's going on the west coast of the U.S.?
It does, and it's yet another series of issues for supply chain executives to have front of mind. I was in India and Southeast Asia last month. My days in the Middle East, I still have a lot of contacts and keep up with those men and women who are driving supply chains. What we're seeing is a couple things. One, Panama Canal drought. about 23% less or fewer crossings in the first 6 weeks of the year thus far. The Canal Authority is doing a great job. They're trying to shuttle by train cargo from the Pacific to the Atlantic and onward movement to the U.S. In the Middle East, now shipping lines are taking their vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, adding additional ships in so they could maintain their fixed weekly services. What I heard on the ground in South and Southeast Asia was that importers and exporters are now starting to shift their cargo to the west coast of the United States. And we'll see a little bit more of that as the weeks and months go on. This is not going to end anytime soon. During my time in the Middle East, we were faced with the Somali interests and the pirates that were going after vessels and tankers in the Red Sea. It took some time and a tremendous allied effort as response.
And Gene, one big question for investors is supply chains, of course, upended during the pandemic. You got interesting line of sight there. What are you seeing?
We look at a dashboard of statistics every morning, Josh, and the numbers I see, the vitals, are at or better than where they were before COVID. The ship that comes in now makes the most transfers of any in the world at about 12,000 containers loaded and unloaded per vessel call, and that ship work is about 4.5 days. That is right where we want it to be. Truck and rail cargo moving off the port, just where it should be, and in the case of trucking, a little bit better than it was before the surge happened.
There was a lot of talk during the pandemic when everything was jammed up that there needed to be work on the technology driving shipping, driving ports, driving trucking as well. Have we seen those changes take effect and that's part of what's benefiting, or is it just that things have kind of eased, but now that also means that the pressure to improve things has eased a little bit?
Yeah, I think a combination of all that, Julie. And what we did in Los Angeles was create the nation's first port community system called the Port Optimizer with the Wabtec company. And it allows us to be able to look pre and post shipment to understand what the bottlenecks are, what's causing them and how we can fix them. During the surge, what we found is one simple causal, and that was that cargo was sitting for much longer than it should. And that place needs to be a transit facility, not a storage center. So if we can keep the velocity going, we call it dwell times. If that cargo moves out by truck in 3 or 4 days, by rail in 2 to 4 days, then suddenly that velocity helps. And it will continue to be the data mining that allows us to get smarter every day, and more companies coming in to help us with that.
And Jim, I want to get you out of here on one last question about China. Obviously there was, some people thought you were going to see a post-COVID boom there. It hasn't happened. It's pretty shaky. What does that mean for the Port of LA? What's the impact?
China's business with the Port of LA represents about 53% of all the containers that we move. And while many executives tell me they're looking at a China plus one strategy, we'll probably see that number drop into the mid-40s over time, but they'll still be a dominant trading partner with the Port of LA. And it's interesting because we've got a different lens that we look through. When I was in China last summer, really not worried about the economic growth, talking about circular economy, but at 5.8% GDP, a lot of folks were nervous about that. So we've got to kind of level set expectations and see how that migration of sourcing, manufacturing, and export flow will take place with these strategies going forward.
Interesting stuff. Thanks, Gene. Good to see you.
Great to see you, brother.
Thanks for coming to visit us in New York. Appreciate it.